Welcome to, or welcome back to, the Agatha May Detective Agency. I'm Agatha May, and in this video, we're taking a look at Suzie Skinner, John Paul Miller's alleged concubine, just to keep it biblical. Before I get started into Suzie's story, let me tell you that from what I've been able to find, she seems rather boring, bland, vanilla. She has the opposite of pizzazz, which is why her nickname is Suzie Plain Baked Potato Skinner. I haven't found a single article, post, or write-up that shows that she dazzles in any area. Maybe she just seems extra lackluster because she's following Wayne Crank Up the Crazy Miller. Suzanne Lynn Jeffress Skinner was born in 1975 in Wilmington, Delaware, to parents who seem entirely normal. She grew up in Pennsylvania, and her father owned a land surveying company in the Oxford, Pennsylvania area. And at one time, his hobby was making cheese. Now, how wholesome is that? Unlike John Paul's father, Suzie's father doesn't seem to have skirted the law and dabbled and sometimes just dove head first into questionable and at times illegal deeds his entire life. Now, Suzie's mother, on the other hand, is quite the derelict. In 2006, Mama received a ticket for an improper U-turn, and I think the family is still reeling from the scandal of it all. Suzie attended Oxford Area High School in Oxford, Pennsylvania. Oxford is a small borough in Chester County, and in 2020 had a population of 5,733. Oxford is in the middle of Amish country, and even though Suzie's family isn't Amish, I wonder if she knows how to churn butter. In high school, Suzie participated in track and field, was on the tennis team, and was an alto in the choir. I think the choir bit surprised me because she doesn't really look like a singer. I don't know what kind of look singers have, but Suzie doesn't have it. She looks like a butter churner. And do you think the Amish insult each other with things like, "You churn butter like a girl"? Suzie graduated from Oxford Area High School in 1993, went on to receive a degree in physical therapy. Then she got the heck out of Pennsylvania and moved to Virginia. Well, that is exciting, isn't it? In 2000, Suzie was working at a hospital in Fishersville, Virginia as a physical therapist. Now, Fishersville is another small town, but no one seems to be able to pin down how many people actually inhabit it. One source has the population at 9,629. Another has it as 4,998. And yet another source has the population at 7,462. Did the people in Fishersville not hold still long enough for anyone to get a proper count? Anyway, while Suzie was working amongst the wildly fluctuating population of Fishersville, her future husband Chris came to the hospital for physical therapy. I don't think Suzie knew at the time that he was her future husband. Earlier that year, Chris and a friend were returning home from a night of drinking at a wedding. Chris unbuckled his seatbelt just long enough to spit tobacco out of the window, and in that moment, his friend lost control of the car. Chris was thrown from the vehicle, his spinal cord was severed, and he was paralyzed from the shoulders down. They were only 700 yards from their destination. Don't drink and drive. Wear your seatbelts. After Chris and Suzie's initial meeting, they parted ways and didn't see each other for 2 years. In 2002, Suzie was once again Chris's therapist, and one of them turned on the charm, which I'm guessing it was Chris, and they started dating. They became engaged in 2003 and were married in January of 2004. Now, there was a blog post about Suzie on Solid Rock Church's website that was taken down after Mica's death because they didn't want people to read about Suzie. But the people at Solid Rock don't realize that websites can be archived and people like me can go find the archived information. So in the post, Susie was recounting how Chris proposed to her. Quote, "There was a handicap-accessible hiking trail in the mountains of Radford, and he proposed on this overlook. Actually, now that I think about it, that was the trail we walked on our first date. I forgot about that." End quote. Ah, geez, baked tater. Chris goes out of his way to find a meaningful spot to propose, and it took you 17 years to put two and two together. Susie might be simple. In 2007, Chris and Susie became parents to twins. Now, Susie and Chris seem to have moved around Virginia quite a bit, and I'd like to think it's because they were robbing banks across the East Coast and couldn't stay in one place very long. But I'm sure it was for an entirely different, completely mundane reason. The most nefarious crimes that Susie seems to have committed during this time were traffic violations. And not even exciting ones, like going 100 miles an hour while driving down the wrong side of the road, topless with a beer in one hand and a cigarette in the other, while Highway to Hell is blasting from the radio. Instead, Susie's infractions were things like parking tickets. In 2013, Chris, Susie, and the twins landed in Myrtle Beach, and in 2018, had the terrible misfortune of becoming members of Solid Rock Church. On September 6, 2021, Chris Skinner drowned in a community pool. He was said to be meeting someone to play chess that morning, and instead ended up in the pool strapped in his wheelchair. There were security cameras that showed he was alone at the time he went into the pool. The police ruled it an accident. As far as I know, whoever he was expected to play chess with never showed up or made themselves known. After Chris's death, MyOriNews.com ran an article about a paddle out, which was a group of people on surfboards and paddle boards that paddled out into the ocean as a way to memorialize Chris. The paddlers came back, by the way. They didn't stay out in the ocean. In the article, Susie was quoted as saying this about Chris. Quote, "If he was having a good day, you knew it, and he was feeling fun and being funny. If he was having a bad day, you knew it, but you knew exactly why. He was so in touch with his thoughts and why he was feeling exactly the way he was feeling. It was really neat to talk to a person like that." End quote. So that's how Susie describes talking to her husband of 17 years. It was really neat. It was swell. It was nifty. It was apt. In the same article, Susie also had the following to say about Chris's death. "It's hard and it's emotional." Well, way to bare your soul, Susie. That's not how I expect anyone to talk about their spouse suddenly dying. I would expect sentiments like, "I'm devastated, I'm crushed, I'm torn, my heart is broken, I miss him so much, I'm still in shock." But Susie just tells everyone it's emotional. Maybe she just isn't good with expressing emotion. Or maybe she's a cyborg. There's been speculation as to whether or not Chris's death was suspicious, but I'll let John Paul's first wife Allison start this conversation. Now, Allison has recently filed for a custody change with John Paul. In an affidavit, she alleges that in 2021, quote, "JP began spending time with his now paramour, Susie, who was the mother of the boys that play on our son's soccer team. JP began using our son to facilitate times he could spend with Susie, which our children were well aware of. Their friends talked about it, and it caused them a tremendous amount of embarrassment. When I learned that JP was exposing our children to yet another one of his adulterous affairs, I confronted JP and Susie and told them not to let it happen again. JP called me the day Susie's husband died in an alleged drowning accident, extremely upset and asking me to pray, which was incredibly bizarre. Based upon information and belief, just 2 weeks prior to this incident, Susie's husband had confronted JP and asked him to leave his wife and children alone. It is chilling to know that the spouses of both Susie and JP are now dead from tragic events. End quote. Now, I don't think we even need to read between the lines to grasp that Allison might be worried that Chris's death was not an accident, and that JP or Susie or both might have had something to do with it. And this is a woman who was married to John Paul for 16 years, so she knows him. Now, there isn't any evidence that I know of that showed that Chris's death was anything other than an accident. And if Mica was still alive, I don't think anyone would question Chris's drowning. But things are different now, aren't they? The day before Chris Skinner's death, John Paul preached a sermon where he said the following, quote, "I can't tell you how many people in this church have been abused by somebody that was supposed to love them and protect them, and it causes them to hold back who God made them to be. And they feel like, and I gave this analogy last week, you feel like you're drowning, and that person is, every time you come up for air, they're pushing you back down underwater." End quote. When looking into Chris's death, I came across the probate filing. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I am not well versed in probate law, but I did find something I think is odd on the records. On their probate records, Horry County has a non-probate column and a probate column. So assets, such as real estate that might not be subject to probate, would go in the non-probate column. Now, Susie and Chris's house, which they owned, isn't listed as an asset in either column. In fact, her only assets listed were other for $25,000. Fun fact, in South Carolina, $25,000 is also the threshold for determining if an estate goes to probate or not. Well, that's just downright uncanny. Less than 3 years after Chris Skinner's death, like Chris, Mica's body was found in water. John Paul preached both memorial services. After photos of Susie and John Paul at dinner 4 days after Mica's death were published, Susie released the following statement, quote, "He is my friend. His wife died 4 days ago, and he had no one to eat with. He asked some people to sit with him, but no one could go. So when he asked if I could go, I went. We've been friends for years. It wasn't a date. People also said he killed his wife, but we think she called the police before she did that and said she bought a gun and wanted to kill herself and wanted to make sure they could ping her phone so her family could find her body." This is from the nurse at the hospital. "Then she did it. She has attempted suicide before. She is schizophrenic, bipolar, and has dependent personality disorder. She put herself off her medication starting in December, against her doctor's orders and JP's wishes, and even texted her family to tell them she was doing it. This is the longest she has ever been off lithium since being diagnosed in 2017. A few weeks ago, she threw a belt out of the car while driving on the highway because she thought it was a snake. She was recently playing chess alone and talking to herself, and when they asked her what she was doing, she said playing chess with the demon. She was very, not extremely, mentally ill, and the people who post things like this on social media haven't spoken to her or JP in years. They were part of his first church that ended in 2015. So none of that is what people make it look like." End quote. Well, that's a lot to unpack. But let's start with why JP feels he needs to hide his phone screen from side chick. She might just be one of many side dishes. So, according to Susie, she was his last choice as a dinner companion, a dinner that definitely, positively wasn't even remotely close to being a date. She seems to know an awfully lot about Mica and what supposedly happened the day she died for someone who was just a last choice friend. Now, when she says, "But we think she called the police," who is we? Are there two of you, Susie? Did you absorb a twin in the womb and still feel that he or she is with you? I'm going to guess the we is her and John Paul. I'm also going to guess that Susie is just regurgitating the same list of diagnoses that John Paul spouts. When telling about the belt, who is they? Why is Susie using so many vague pronouns? Also, these photos were allegedly taken in November of 2023, and that is not how a man looks at a woman who is his last choice friend. But maybe, once again, John Paul just couldn't get anyone to go to eat with him that day. You're such a last choice pal, Suze. And I believe Mica actually did say that she was playing chess with the demon, but I think she said it in reference to John Paul. I think he knows that too, and that's why he's trying to make it sound like she literally thought she was playing chess with the demon. He's the demon and was playing games with her, and she was trying to stay a couple of steps ahead. I'm sure it's just a coincidence that chess is mentioned in both spouses' deaths. When Susie said she was very not mentally ill, I think she actually meant to say she was very, if not extremely, mentally ill. Strange how those little slips peek through. Also, when Susie says that the people that are talking about John Paul are from his old church, she is incorrect. John Paul didn't have two churches, just two buildings. Well, actually, 3 buildings. It's always been the same church. There were people from the old location that moved to his new location with them, but that was in 2013. And I have talked to several of these people. I've also looked at the website archives, and the only difference in the website between 2015 and 2016 is that the photo of John Paul and Allison that was on the homepage in 2015 was changed to just photos of John Paul in 2016. Now, he might have stepped down from preaching for a short time, but from the looks of it, that was just so he'd have time to stalk and harass Allison. This is also the time when John Paul confessed to the church that he had had inappropriate encounters with underage girls at the church. He was supposed to get counseling, but Allison states in her child custody filing that she doesn't think he ever did. The elders of the church wanted him to step down, but he owns the building. He owns the church, and much like his father, he isn't going to let anyone tell him what to do. Prior to Mica's death, Susie's daughter had posted a photo of notes she had written about John Paul and Susie's relationship, the relationship that Susie says doesn't exist. In the notes, her daughter is praying that John Paul will change his ways and that Susie will stop seeing him. Neither of those things have happened. The notes also indicate that while Susie might be as bland as white rice that is still a little crunchy and still has some water in the bottom of the pan because someone didn't cook it correctly, she doesn't seem to have a problem lying to the world. I don't know what Susie sees in Pee-wee the Monkey Boy, but her daughter seems to be a much better judge of character than she is. Given the allegations of JP's proclivity for young girls, I'd be concerned that he is more interested in Susie's daughter than in Susie. She needs to be a good mother and dump the little weasel. In reading about Susie and Chris's story, Susie often mentions that she appreciated Chris's openness and honesty. Well, her taste in men has drastically changed, hasn't it? As an armchair psychologist, I wonder if Susie embraced the role of a martyr during her years of caring for Chris, and now feels as though she deserves some excitement after her years of servitude. I think that would be completely understandable. But if this is the case, there are so many other ways to live an exciting life without stooping to the level of John Paul. Can she not really see who he is? Is she blinded by love? Or is she as unprincipled as he is? Inquiring minds want to know, Suze. How does she go from being someone that Chris described as, quote, goody-goody, to being someone that chooses to become involved with the likes of John Paul? The choices she makes in the next few months are going to heavily affect the rest of her life. Her children will soon be making their way into the world, and if she can't make a healthy decision for herself, she needs to do it for them. And if she can't do it for them, then we'll know that she actually is a perfect match for John Paul Miller. As far as I know, Suzie Skinner is not being investigated for any crime and is not a person of interest in any investigation. She is innocent until proven guilty. So I am working on the video about JP's trusty sidekick, Trisha, and I've been waiting for some documents so I can verify a piece of information. However, if I don't get the information soon, I'm going to go ahead and release the video. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe, like, share, and comment, as this helps my channel grow. Until next time, stay safe and be happy.